I once thought I would love Emily Carter for a very long time, maybe even for the rest of my life, but that illusion shattered the day I saw Noah Quinn's Instagram post, and it hit me harder than the flu I was battling. It was just a simple photo he posted, taken from inside his car, a rainy cityscape blurred through the windshield, the caption written casually but carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. After all these years, you're still the only one willing to wait 3 hours for me after work. The post date: my birthday. The exact same evening I sat alone at home, feverish, waiting 3 hours for Emily to show up. I didn't even need anyone to spell it out. I knew then that the person she'd been waiting for, the one she cared about enough to stand in the cold rain for, wasn't me. It was always Noah. It felt like everyone knew her coworkers, her old classmates, maybe even strangers online, and the cruelest part was that I had always known too, deep down, but lied to myself that love could overwrite history. Emily and Noah had once been the golden couple of Riverton State, the kind of love story everyone gossiped about in cafeterias and libraries, the perfect pair until graduation tore them apart when Noah went abroad. If he hadn't left, they would have never broken up, and if he came back, it was only natural that she'd drift back to him like gravity reclaiming a planet. What did I mean to her? A temporary substitute, a placeholder boyfriend whose existence wasn't public knowledge. She made sure no one else knew about us. And because I was young and stupidly in love, I accepted it. I thought maybe if I waited long enough, maybe if I was patient and devoted enough, I could change the story. That one day her heart, that massive oak tree rooted in Noah's memory, would finally sprout a leaf with my name on it. But seeing that Instagram caption broke the last illusion I had. I realized she never even planted a seed for me. I wasn't just losing a race, I had never even been in the competition. The door creaked open then, letting in a gust of cold air before it dissolved into the warmth of our apartment. Emily walked in, peeled off her coat, and froze for half a second when she saw me. Then she said casually, "I forgot to buy your medicine." I had asked her earlier to pick up cold meds on her way home. I get knocked down hard by the flu every winter, body aching to the point where even walking feels impossible. This time was no different. I had spent the afternoon sweating and shivering, forcing myself to rest while waiting for her to bring back the one thing that could get me through the night. But she forgot. Normally, I would have smiled, brushed it off, told her it was okay because she was busy, because I understood. But something in me snapped. I didn't want to be understanding anymore. My mind flashed to know if it had been him sick in bed, would Emily have forgotten? Of course not. She wouldn't just remember the medicine, she'd probably cook him soup, tuck him in, hold his hand until he fell asleep. She wasn't careless, she just didn't care about me. That was the difference. All my excuses, all my forgiveness, were nothing but self-inflicted illusions. I stood up without a word, grabbed my jacket, and headed for the door. As I brushed past her, she caught my wrist. "You're mad?" she asked, eyebrows furrowed like I was overreacting, like I was the unreasonable one. What she meant was, "What right do you have to be angry?" I wanted to laugh, wanted to scream that I wished this was just me being petty, that I wanted us to argue like normal couples do, to fight and then make up. But I didn't even feel sad anymore. Just tired. So I pulled my hand free. If she wouldn't take care of me, then I had to take care of myself. Outside, the icy air burned my lungs, shocking me awake. For the first time, a thought whispered into my head, maybe I didn't love Emily anymore. The pharmacy down the street was supposed to be open 24 hours, but the lights were off when I got there. Even signs that promised permanence could betray you. If even a store could break its promise, how could I expect Emily to keep one she never even made? I finally found another open place, bought a bottle of ibuprofen, and carried the small plastic bag back to our apartment. Funny how something so light felt unbearably heavy in my hands. On my way back, I noticed a figure leaning against the gate. Emily. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin black cashmere sweater, shivering in the night air. Before I could say anything, she stepped forward, took the bag from my hand, switched it into her left hand, and reached out with her right to grab mine. "You're freezing," she murmured. Her palm was soft and warm against my cold fingers, and the unexpected heat made my nose sting. I couldn't even remember the last time we held hands. She never liked going out with me, hated the idea of strolling like couples did, hated the PDA. Even when we ate out, she walked too fast, always 2 steps ahead. So I learned not to bother her, not to cling. I thought maybe she just needed space, that she'd think of me when work wasn't consuming her life. But I was wrong. Love doesn't forget. If someone truly loves you, they'll make space for you no matter how busy they are. If they don't, then you're just dust in their world, unimportant, replaceable, unnoticed. I hummed, a non-answer to her concern. She blinked, surprised. In the past, if she'd shown me even a sliver of care, I would have been overjoyed, bouncing like a fool. This time, I couldn't even fake it. She bit her lip, then said, "It's my fault. I won't forget next time." I glanced at her, genuinely shocked she even admitted fault. But the word, "next time," felt hollow. I'd already been hurt. I'd already been disappointed. "Thank you," I said flatly. She frowned, started to speak, then gave up. The street lamp cast our elongated shadows across the pavement, one side of me burning from her grip, the other side still cold. We'd been together for 3 years, and I could still see the image burned into my memory, Emily on stage as a freshman, representing the new students, bathed in light while the audience sat in darkness. She looked like gold dust back then, blinding. Everyone knew her name. And everyone knew she was with Noah Quinn, the campus golden boy. When he left for grad school overseas senior year, he broke it off cleanly. I never understood how someone could let go of a girl like her. But selfishly, I had to thank him. Because if he hadn't walked away, Emily would have never said yes to me. That night, when she nodded to my trembling confession, I thought I had won. That it didn't matter Noah didn't love her, because I would love her enough for both of us. I believed love could be one-sided and still survive. I thought I'd be the final key that unlocked her heart. But love has never worked that way. And for the first time, 3 years later, I started to ask myself a question I had never dared to consider: what if I had never confessed to her? Would my life have been easier? Maybe I would have dated someone else, someone who genuinely liked me back, and we could have lived like an ordinary couple, mutual, simple, and real. That thought rattled me so badly I woke up in a sweat that night, Emily sitting up next to me looking worried. For once, she offered to make me breakfast. No need, I told her automatically. We had toast in the kitchen. She looked startled. That was when it hit Mesh had never cooked for me, not once in 3 years. And when she smiled at my rejection instead of getting annoyed, I realized I was past the point of return. Her smile no longer stirred anything in me. Later, at the table, she handed me milk. "Drink this," she said. I reached for a handful of nuts. She froze. "You're allergic," she said, frowning. I looked at her with exhaustion. "No. That's Noah. You got it mixed up." The moment his name slipped from my lips, the air froze solid. Her expression darkened instantly. "Why are you bringing him up?" she snapped. And I just smiled bitterly, my chest collapsing inward. I didn't want to fight. I didn't even want to explain. I just said, "My mistake." She stared at me for a long second before slamming her chair back and leaving the table. The bottle of milk sat in front of me, untouched. She'd never remembered that I was lactose intolerant. That entire day, silence choked our apartment. When she finally texted me that evening, saying she wouldn't be home for dinner, I already knew where she was. Sure enough, Noah had posted again complaining about late nights at the office. Which meant Emily would be waiting for him outside, just like the caption from my birthday. And all I could do was wander Riverton's icy streets, aimless, wondering how I had turned into nothing more than a stand-in character in someone else's love story. The streets of Riverton were empty that night, streetlights buzzing faintly as if they too were tired of watching people like me stumble through heartbreak, and by the time I realized how far I had walked, my legs were stiff from the cold, my stomach hollow, but strangely I wasn't hungry at all, just numb, dragging myself past neon signs and shuttered stores until the muffled sound of music from a bar drifted into my ears like some kind of temptation, a place to lose myself for an hour, so. Without thinking too much, I pushed open the door and let the wave of warmth and alcohol-scented air crash over me. The bar wasn't crowded, just a handful of people sitting at scattered tables, and on the small stage a singer sat with a guitar, adjusting the strings while humming into the mic, her voice raw and husky but oddly soothing in the dim light. I ordered something sweet, a drink I wouldn't usually touch but needed now, because I didn't want the kind of bitterness that would send me spiraling deeper. I sipped slowly, watching the way the singer lowered her head, her hair falling across her face, and even though the light was too dim to make out the details, something about her felt familiar, like déjà vu I couldn't quite place. One drink in and my cheeks were already warmy. Tolerance has always been terribly so. I decided to leave before I embarrassed myself, but as I fumbled for my phone to call a cab, I realized it was missing, and just as panic started to build, a voice called out from behind me, soft but full of shock, "James. Is that really you?" I froze. Hardly anyone had called me by my old nickname in years, but hearing it now tugged me straight back to high school, to the days when my round face earned me the teasing name, Jimmy D. I turned, blinking under the bar's dim light, and my jaw dropped. Standing there, holding my phone in her hand like she'd been keeping it safe for me, was Sophie Lanamy, high school desk mate, the girl who used to nap through first period, sing under her breath, and ask to borrow my homework like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, I thought maybe the alcohol was playing tricks on me. "You really don't remember me?" she teased, tilting her head, raising an eyebrow, though her smile gave it away. Of course she knew I remembered, she just wanted to watch me squirm. Of course I remember," I stammered, taking my phone from her hand. "Sophie Lane. How could I forget?" She had been fire and chaos in high school, a girl with tiger teeth who fought with teachers, argued with her parents, and eventually stormed out of Riverton High in a blaze of rebellion when she insisted on chasing music instead of the future her wealthy family had scripted for her. Rumor had it she'd gone to New York, then Los Angeles, then overseas. And now here she was, standing in front of me in a Riverton bar like nothing had changed and everything had. "Come on," she said suddenly, slinging her arm around my shoulders the way she used to in the hallways, "let me drive you home before you pass out on the sidewalk." And just like that, I was dragged back 10 years, 16 again, when she'd yank me away from my homework and demand I walk with her to the corner store for snacks. Only now, we were adults, and I found myself fumbling for an excuse, a reason to say no, but Sophie's grin turned mischievous as if she could read my hesitation. Don't tell me the model student turned into a lightweight drinker who can't handle one cocktail. "Get in the car, Jimmy D." And before I could argue, she waved her Mercedes keys in front of me, the car pulling up to the curb seconds later. I got in. The interior smelled faintly of vanilla, familiar and foreign all at once. "So where the hell did you disappear to?" she asked, eyes still sharp as ever but her tone softer now. I explained in pieces: college, work, moving in with Emily, and even saying her name out loud left a bitter taste in my mouth, so I switched subjects. "What about you? Didn't you vanish after senior year?" Sophie smirked, shrugging. "I didn't vanish. My parents pulled strings, sent me abroad. I thought I was chasing music on my own, but really, it was just them keeping me from falling flat on my face. Turns out they were still paying the bills while I thought I was living my dream." There was humor in her voice, but underneath it I heard something else, regret, maybe, or defiance still clinging after all these years. At a red light, she gripped the steering wheel tighter, then said quietly, "I came back once, you know. Snuck onto campus, looked for you. You were out on the field for PE. I only watched for a second before I left. My chest tightened at the thought, at the image of her standing in the shadows while I never even knew. But before I could figure out what to say, she parked outside my building. So this is where you live, she said, tilting her head up at the glowing window above us. Your girlfriend? I followed her gaze. Sure enough, Emily was standing at the window, arms crossed, curtain half drawn. I nodded, throat dry. Sophie smiled faintly, and for a split second, I saw the same girl who used to steal my breakfast back in homeroom, saying with mock seriousness, this could be a problem. I laughed despite myself, because 10 years ago she'd said those exact words when other girls confessed to me, like my dating life was an inconvenience to her snack supply. Only this time, she wasn't joking. Good night, Jimmy D, she said, turning back to her car, and I stood there watching until her taillights disappeared. When I walked upstairs and opened the door, the first thing that hit me was the stench of cigarette smoke. Emily was on the couch, eyes red, a half-empty ashtray on the table. She had quit years ago, or so she said. I guess Noah didn't like smokers, but now, back in her orbit again, she smoked like she was trying to burn herself alive. James, she said, her voice tight, brittle. I ignored her, started toward the bedroom, but she called again, louder this time, James Walker. I turned, blank expression, my face colder than I intended. She faltered, anger flickering then fading as her words tangled on her tongue. Finally she managed, you went out tonight. I did, I said flatly, hand on the doorknob. She stood abruptly, panicked. You always tell me when you go out. At least you leave a light on for me. I let out a laugh, sharp and hollow. Funny. I thought you weren't coming back tonight. Thought you'd be with Noah. The silence after that was deafening. Her lips parted, but no words came. The way her face crumpled, the way she clenched her fists, it should have made me feel guilty, but all I felt was emptiness. She tried again, softer this time, his office is far. It's late. I didn't want him taking a cab alone. I stared at her, not even angry anymore, just done, like staring at an old jacket that had grown moldy in the closet. I didn't want to argue. Arguments meant passion, and I didn't have any left for her. So I just said, I understand, and closed the bedroom door behind me. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone, probably back to her cycle of work, smoke, and waiting for Noah. The apartment felt like a stranger's place, cluttered with memories that no longer belonged to me. I made coffee, sat in silence, and realized that for the first time in years, I didn't care whether Emily came home or not. Later that week, she brought up marriage out of nowhere, tried to pull my parents into it, tried to bind me with family pressure, but deep down, I already knew I wasn't hers anymore, not really. What she wanted wasn't me, it was possession, the fear of losing something she thought she deserved. And I was too exhausted to keep playing the role of her consolation prize. That was the night the foundation finally cracked, and I knew something irreversible had begun. When the New Year holidays came around, my office finally gave us a few days off, and in any other version of my life this would have been the time to breathe easy, go home, sit with my parents, let them scold me for not settling down yet, but this year everything felt off, because Emily had insisted for years that we keep our relationship secret, and I had always obeyed like a fool, telling my family I was still single, telling friends I was just focused on work, because I thought maybe she would one day step into the light and stand next to me proudly, but she never did, not once in 3 years, so when my parents didn't call me this year to ask about marriage I figured maybe they had given up, maybe they'd finally stopped worrying, but then Emily came home one evening and told me to change into something formal because she had arranged a dinner with my parents. And when I blinked at her in confusion she added with that calm voice of hers, "It's been 3 years, James. It's time to talk about the wedding." For a second I thought I'd misheard her. "You what?" I asked, and when she confirmed that she had contacted my parents behind my back I felt my whole body tense, a dread creeping up my spine. "You called them?" My voice cracked from the anger I couldn't swallow. She flinched, then asked me a question that nearly broke me. You don't want to marry me, do you? The irony was so sharp it nearly made me laugh. Once upon a time I would have begged her to marry me, I would have rushed to the courthouse, dragged the whole world to witness it, but now I was staring at a woman who loved another man and clung to me only out of fear of losing something, not out of love. No, I said firmly. I don't want to marry you. Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe the words had left my mouth, and for a moment I almost pitied her, almost thought maybe she was finally realizing the damage she had done, but then she collapsed into my arms, whispering through tears that she was just afraid of losing me, that she only acted out of panic, and while I let her cling to me, my heart was already gone, my mind repeating the same thought. You're not afraid of losing me, Emily, you're afraid of losing your claim to something you thought you owned. I went through the motions anyway, agreeing to show up for dinner because my parents had already traveled into town, and I didn't want them to see me break down before they even sat down. That night the restaurant was lit up with chandeliers, one of Riverton's most expensive places, and I wore a black suit I had bought years ago when Emily got promoted, a suit she never even saw because she didn't invite me to her celebration. She was in high spirits that night, planning aloud how both sets of parents could meet again in a few days to set the wedding date, her hand wrapped tightly around my arm as if she were holding onto a prize, but all I felt was cold exhaustion. Then the phone in her purse began to ring. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and rejected the call. My gut told me exactly who it was. Seconds later it rang again, and this time she looked at me nervously, waiting for my permission like a child asking for candy. Answer it, I said, forcing a smile that felt like a blade slicing my lips. She answered, and I didn't need to hear the voice on the other end to know it was Noah Quinn. The way her posture shifted, the way her voice softened, it was obvious. A few minutes later she hung up, looking troubled, and told me Noah had gotten into some kind of accident at work. Before she even finished, I cut her off. Go, I said. She froze. What about your parents? Go, I repeated, my voice so empty it scared even me. And like that, she left, rushing to the elevator without looking back, not even remembering that my parents were probably already on their way. I stood there, heart pounding like I had just run a marathon, and then my phone buzzed with a message from my mom, her voice cheerful in a long voice note telling me they had just arrived at the hotel, laughing about how lucky I was to have such a thoughtful girlfriend who invited them, and at that moment I collapsed onto a bench, covering my face with my hands, crying in silence like a man who had finally accepted defeat. I don't know how long I sat there before I felt someone grab my shoulder. When I looked up, it was Sophie Lane. Somehow she was just there, like fate had thrown her into the scene. What happened to you? She asked, concern etching her face. My eyes burned from tears but I forced a laugh, saying it was nothing, but Sophie wasn't the kind of person to accept half-truths. James Walker, she said, her tone sharp but her eyes soft, you never used to be polite with me. Don't start now. Whatever it is, let me help. And in that moment I realized how rare that was, someone who actually wanted to stand next to me instead of use me. Minutes later, instead of Emily introducing me to my parents, Sophie was by my side at dinner. She introduced herself as my fiancée without hesitation, holding my hand under the table as if she had been preparing for this role her whole life. My father, a small-town man who wore his pride like armor, was instantly charmed by her toast, while my mother stared at her name with surprise before breaking into a smile. It was obvious they loved her immediately. Sophie laughed at their jokes, matched their stories, carried the entire night with the kind of warmth Emily had never once shown. My parents left that dinner glowing with pride, telling me they were finally relieved, that I had found someone who could stand by me. And as I walked them back to their hotel room, I realized my heart no longer ached, it just felt lighter, freer. But later that night when I opened my phone, I saw a dozen missed calls from Emily, texts begging for forgiveness, explanations about Noah's accident, promises that she would make it up to me. For the first time, I didn't feel tempted to answer. I just stared at the messages, then turned off my phone, laying back in bed with Sophie's words echoing in my ears, "Whatever it is, let me help." And for the first time in years, I believed someone actually meant it. The closer it got to New Year, the heavier my chest felt, because in past years my parents would blow up my phone demanding to know why I was still single and reminding me I wasn't getting any younger, but this year there was nothing, complete silence, and I actually thought they'd finally given up nagging me until one evening Emily came home looking strangely bright, told me to put on a suit because she had arranged dinner with my parents, and my heart just about stopped because she'd spent 3 years telling me to keep a secret, 3 years making me lie to the people who raised me, and now she had gone behind my back and dragged them into it. So when I asked if she'd really contacted them, she looked me in the eye and asked if I didn't want to marry her, and the anger and exhaustion that had been choking me all this time finally came out because the truth was obvious. I didn't want to, not anymore. Maybe once upon a time I'd have begged for that chance, but now the thought of marrying her felt like putting my head in a noose, but I couldn't just throw my parents into the fire, so I agreed to show up. We walked into one of Riverdon's fancy restaurants and she was practically glowing as she talked about setting wedding dates with both families, gripping my arm like I was a trophy, but all I felt was tired, like I was suffocating, and then her phone started ringing. She glanced at the screen and declined the call, but the way her eyes shifted I knew exactly who it was. Noah, the guy who'd always owned her heart, the guy who had been a ghost in every fight, every silence, every distance between us, the guy she never stopped waiting for. And when the phone rang again I smiled bitterly and told her to answer it, and when she hung up she looked at me apologetically and said Noah had an accident and needed her, and I didn't even let her finish before I said go, because what else was there to say? She hesitated, asked what about my parents, and I told her I'd handle it, my voice so flat it startled even me, and then she ran, didn't even look back, just ran to the elevator with her phone clutched in her hand while I stood there feeling the last bit of my strength leave me. And right then my phone buzzed with a voice note from my mom laughing about how thoughtful my girlfriend was for arranging this dinner, her and dad sounding so proud, so happy, and I sat down in the hallway covering my face, breaking apart silently because I didn't know how I was supposed to face them. I didn't know how to explain any of it, and when I felt someone's hand steady me I looked up and couldn't believe my eyes. It was Sophie Lane. She had just come out of a meeting nearby and happened to see me, asked me what was wrong, and I tried to brush it off, but she wasn't the type to let things slide. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "James Walker, you never used to be polite with me, don't start now. Whatever it is, let me help." And that was the first time in years I felt someone wasn't asking out of curiosity but because they actually cared. So when dinner started Sophie was the one walking in next to me. She took my hand under the table, and when my parents asked who she was she smiled, looked them in the eye, and introduced herself as my fiancé, bold as hell, confident like she had been waiting for this role her whole life. And my dad, the small-town man who always measured people by sincerity, was instantly won over by her toast, while my mom was surprised at first but then kept nodding approvingly as Sophie matched every story, laughed at their jokes, answered every question like she belonged there, and for the first time I realized what it felt like to sit through a family dinner without holding my breath, without worrying I'd say the wrong thing or be dismissed as unimportant. My parents left glowing with pride, telling me they could finally stop worrying, that they trusted me to be happy, and when I walked them back to the hotel room I felt lighter than I had in years, like I had stepped out of a prison cell. But later that night when I opened my phone there were dozens of missed calls and desperate texts from Emily begging for forgiveness, explaining about Noah's accident, promising she would make it up to me, and for the first time I didn't even feel tempted to reply. I just stared at the screen, then shut it off and lay back with Sophie's words still echoing in my head, "Whatever it is, let me help." And I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the moment my story was finally starting to change. The next morning I woke up in the hotel room with a pounding headache and my phone buzzing like it was trying to break itself, and of course it was Emily again, text after text, call after call, all saying the same thing, that she was sorry, that she didn't mean to hurt me, that Noah's accident was an emergency, that she would explain everything if I would just meet her. And for the first time in 3 years I let the phone buzz itself silent because deep down I knew explanations didn't matter anymore, not when the same name kept showing up in every excuse, the same man who had been living in the center of her heart while I wasted 3 years trying to carve out a space for myself. And yet I wasn't even angry anymore, just tired, like a fighter who's gone too many rounds and has nothing left in him, so instead of replying I got up, washed my face, and told myself today I would take control, even if it was just one decision, so I grabbed my things and went back to our apartment to pack, the place already smelling like smoke because Emily had started chain-smoking again, something she'd quit for years because Noah didn't like it, and now she sat on the couch with red eyes and a trembling hand holding a cigarette like it was her only lifeline. She looked at me like a cornered animal when I walked in with my suitcase, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, but then she whispered my name, begged me not to leave, swore she would change, swore she finally realized she might lose me, and I just shook my head because she wasn't crying out of love, she was crying out of fear of losing control, fear of losing a man who had stood by her when she was at her lowest, a man she never really wanted but always kept as a backup, and I told her flat out, Emily, I'm done, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore, and she grabbed at me like I was drifting away in a storm, asking if I was really willing to throw away 3 years like they were nothing, and the irony was so bitter I almost laughed because those 3 years weren't nothing, they were everything to me, they were my blood, sweat, tears, and love, but they meant nothing to her, they were just filler between Noah leaving and Noah coming back, so I pulled her hands off me and said the words I should have said months ago, we're over, and I dragged my suitcase out the door, ignoring the sound of her sobs behind me, ignoring the part of me that still hated hurting anyone, because the truth was I had been hurting myself for years and it was finally time to stop. I rented a place near the office, a small but bright apartment where the air didn't smell like someone else's indifference, and while I was moving I ran into Sophie walking Muffin, her golden retriever, and the way she lit up when she saw me made me pause because I hadn't seen genuine joy directed at me in so long. She teased me about hauling boxes like a college kid, offered to help, and before I knew it she was standing in my living room with Muffin running around like he owned the place. And she was laughing, sipping coffee, telling me about her music gigs and her failed band and the business she was trying to build, and it felt so effortless, so natural, that for a moment I forgot I had just walked away from 3 years of my life, but then my phone buzzed again and it was a message from Emily saying she had told my parents everything, told them we were getting married, told them to expect a date soon, and my blood ran cold because I knew my parents, I knew how excited they'd been at dinner, I knew they were probably already telling relatives their son was finally settling down, and I knew I couldn't let them be strung along in this circus any longer, so I sat there staring at the screen, Sophie watching me quietly, and after a long silence I typed the words that sealed it all, we're done. Don't contact me again. I hit send, blocked her number, and for the first time since this nightmare began I felt like I could breathe. Days turned into weeks and Emily didn't stop. She switched numbers, sent emails, even showed up at the office once, causing a scene that made my coworkers whisper behind my back, but I didn't budge, I didn't let her back in, because every time I looked at her face all I saw was Noah, all I saw was the woman who left me alone on my birthday while she waited 3 hours in the rain for another man, and I swore I would never live like that again, but of course Noah himself couldn't stay out of the picture. He eventually reached out to me, asked me to meet him at a cafe on Main Street, and out of some morbid curiosity I went, because I wanted to see the man who had haunted my life without ever being present, and when I walked in he was sitting by the window, polished and handsome but clearly exhausted, like the years had taken something from him too, and he looked me in the eye and told me straight up that he and Emily were going to get married, that he wanted to tell me first, as if I was supposed to congratulate him, as if I was supposed to hand her over like property, and I just smirked and asked him for the wedding invitation, held out my hand knowing damn well he didn't have one, and when he froze I leaned back and told him the truth, that if Emily was really committed to him he wouldn't need to come here and posture, he wouldn't need to convince himself I was the problem, and I walked away from that cafe feeling lighter than ever because I finally saw it clearly, both of them were the same, both selfish, both chasing ghosts, both blind to what real love meant, and neither of them deserved another ounce of my time. That night Sophie knocked on my door with Muffin tugging at the leash, asked if I wanted to go for a walk, and for the first time in a long time I said yes without hesitation, and as we walked under the streetlights with the dog darting ahead I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. But even in that peace I knew Emily wasn't done, that she'd keep clawing, keep trying to drag me back, and that was fine, because now I finally had the strength to say no. Winter bled into spring, and for the first time in years I started to remember what life felt like when it wasn't built around someone else's shadow. My mornings were simple, coffee in hand, walking to the office from my new apartment, evenings sometimes spent alone, sometimes spent with Sophie and her golden retriever Muffin, and every day I felt the weight of Emily's name fading a little more from my chest. But of course she wasn't done with me. People like her never are. She tried new numbers, fake accounts, even sent letters to my office building, begging, apologizing, swearing she was lost without me, and I ignored them all. But then she crossed the line by showing up outside my parents' house during a holiday break, crying to them about how she loved me, how she just needed another chance, and my mom called me in confusion asking why I hadn't told her the full story, and the shame that burned through me almost drove me insane. Because my parents had trusted me, had trusted the version of Emily I once painted, and now they were left sorting through her lies. So I drove back to Riverton that weekend, sat them down, and told them everything, how Emily had been in love with Noah all along, how I had wasted 3 years trying to convince her otherwise, how she only turned to me because he had left, and my dad, the quiet man who rarely spoke much, just looked me in the eye and said, "Son, love is only worth it if it's returned," and I realized how obvious that truth had been all along, how stupid I was for needing to hear it from him. After that conversation, Emily's desperate attempt stopped being tragic and started feeling pathetic. I blocked her completely, and the silence that followed was louder than any apology she could have given. But just when I thought I was free of both her and Noah, he decided to reappear, this time with less arrogance and more desperation, cornering me outside the office one evening, his face pale, his words frantic, telling me he couldn't understand why Emily refused to see him anymore, why she had grown cold to him too. And I almost laughed in his face because it was so obvious. He thought he was the hero returning from exile, but in truth he had abandoned her once and she could never forgive that, and I told him flat out, "That's not my problem, man, whatever happens between you two has nothing to do with me." But he grabbed my arm, his eyes wild, and asked if I had poisoned her against him, if I had told her things that made her stop loving him, and in that moment I saw myself in him, the same pathetic obsession, the same inability to accept that sometimes people just don't love you, and it disgusted me, so I shook him off and told him to grow up, then walked away without looking back. Meanwhile, Sophie had become the one steady point in all this chaos, showing up at my apartment with takeout after long nights, dragging me to open mic nights where she sang with that voice that used to echo through high school classrooms, letting Muffin jump on my couch like it was his second home, and slowly, without forcing it, without games, she filled the empty spaces Emily had left, but she never pushed, never asked for more than I was ready to give, and maybe that's why one night when she teased me about being too serious, I kissed her without even thinking, and the look on her face, half shocked, half smiling, told me maybe I wasn't as broken as I thought. But the past has a way of clawing back when you least expect it, and just as Sophie and I started to find some rhythm, I received a message from an old college friend, someone who had kept in touch with Emily, and his words froze me. "Do you know what she's become since you left? She keeps dating guys who look like you, acts like she's trying to replace you, but nothing sticks, she's falling apart." I didn't reply, I didn't want to, but his voice kept echoing in my head, planting guilt I didn't ask for, because deep down I knew the version of Emily I had loved was gone long before I left, and still I found myself lying awake that night wondering if walking away had been the final blow that broke her. Sophie noticed, of course, she always did, asked me what was wrong, and I brushed it off, but later when we were walking Muffin through the park she stopped and said, "James, you can't save people who don't want to be saved, you can only choose yourself," and in that moment I realized she wasn't just talking about Emily, she was reminding me of something bigger. Something I had forgotten, that my life wasn't meant to be spent in someone else's shadow. Spring turned to summer and I finally felt alive again, focused on work, preparing for my transfer to the Chicago headquarters, spending weekends with Sophie, sometimes meeting my parents who had grown fond of her, and for the first time in years I was living a life that belonged to me. But fate wasn't going to let me off that easy, because just when I thought I had closed that chapter for good, Emily showed up one last time, standing at my door, thinner than ever, eyes hollow, and she whispered, "James, I don't know who I am without you." I stared at her, stunned, because it was the first time she admitted what I had always known: she didn't love me, she just needed me as a mirror, as a placeholder for someone else, as proof she wasn't alone, and for once I didn't feel anger or guilt, just pity. So I told her the truth, the only truth left to give: Emily, you'll have to figure that out without me. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest heavy but clear, because I knew now the past could knock all it wanted, but I wasn't opening the door again. What I didn't realize yet was that walking away wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would test me and Sophie in ways I couldn't imagine, because love, real love, is never just about two people, it's about surviving everything that tries to tear you apart, and I had a feeling our story was only just starting. A year later I found myself boarding a plane back to Riverton after months of working at the Chicago headquarters, and as the wheels touched down I felt a rush of emotions I didn't expect, nostalgia mixing with relief, because for the first time I was returning not as someone chasing after Emily's shadow but as a man who had finally chosen his own life. And when I walked out of the terminal my parents were waiting with wide smiles, my mom waving so hard she almost dropped her purse, my dad pretending to be composed but grinning like a kid, and behind them stood Sophie, her hair tied back, Muffin wagging his tail like he'd just won the lottery, and the sight of her there, waiting, made something inside me settle for good, like I had finally found my home, not a place but a person. And that night over dinner I listened to my mom teasing Sophie, calling her daughter by accident and then correcting herself with a laugh, and I realized they had already accepted her in ways they never could accept Emily, because Sophie was real, she showed up, she cared, she wasn't perfect but she didn't have to be, she just loved me as I was, and that was more than enough. Life after that started to move quickly, months blurring into each other as Sophie and I built routines, small ones like grocery runs and Sunday morning walks, bigger ones like planning vacations and talking about moving into a house together, and yet in the middle of that normalcy I couldn't escape the ghost of Emily entirely, because one night while scrolling through Instagram I stumbled on a photo a mutual friend posted. Emily in a white dress at her wedding, standing beside a man I didn't recognize, not Noah, not anyone I had ever seen before, just a stranger who looked proud to have her by his side, and my first reaction was a jolt of surprise, maybe even a little disbelief, but then, to my own shock, I felt nothing else, no anger, no jealousy, no bitterness, just a kind of detached relief, because it confirmed what I already knew: that chapter was closed for both of us. And maybe she had finally found what she wanted, even if it wasn't with me, and I was okay with that. When I showed Sophie the photo later she looked at me with that playful glint in her eyes and asked, "Do you feel anything?" And I shook my head with a smile, telling her honestly, "No, I don't," and the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her smile softened, told me she believed me, and maybe for the first time I believed myself too. The following months felt like a reward for all the storms I'd endured, career thriving, family proud, and Sophie always there, grounding me with her humor and her stubbornness. And yet what really stuck with me were the quiet moments, her singing in our living room while Muffin howled along like he was part of the band, her rolling her eyes at me when I forgot to do laundry again, her leaning against me on the couch after long days, whispering stupid jokes until we both laughed ourselves to sleep. And in those moments I realized this was what real love looked like: not fireworks, not obsession, not pain disguised as passion, but steady, mutual, consistent care, the kind of love that doesn't demand you bleed to prove it's real. I thought back to the boy I was at 17, trembling as I confessed to Emily under the impression that if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, she'd love me back, and I almost wanted to pat that version of me on the shoulder and tell him it would all be okay, that one day he'd learn love isn't about begging someone to stay, it's about walking beside the person who chooses to. And that realization hit me hard one evening as Sophie and I walked through the park, her hand slipping into mine, and she turned to me with that mischievous smile and asked, "So when are you going to marry me?" I laughed so hard I almost choked, teasing her about how forward she was, but the truth was I had been thinking about it for months, the ring hidden in my desk drawer back home a constant reminder, and a few weeks later under the autumn leaves of Riverton's old square I finally asked her properly, my hands shaking, my voice unsteady, and when she said yes with tears in her eyes and Muffin barking like crazy, I felt the last piece of my old life fall away. The wedding wasn't huge, not like the grand affairs Emily once dreamed of, but it was perfect, filled with laughter and music and the people who actually mattered, and when Sophie and I exchanged vows, I didn't think of anyone else, not Noah, not Emily, not the pain or the regrets, only her, the woman who had waited, who had shown up, who had chosen me over and over again. Years later, sitting on our porch watching muffin chase butterflies, Sophie leaned against me and whispered, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emily had loved you back?" And I thought about it for a second before shaking my head, answering honestly, "If she had, I might never have found you," and that truth was enough to silence every ghost, every regret, every what if, because the life I had now, messy and ordinary and beautiful, was the one I was always meant to live. And as I held Sophie's hand tighter, I realized something simple but profound: love isn't about who you wait for, it's about who waits with you. And in the end I was grateful, not for the heartbreak, not for the wasted years, but for the way they led me here, to her, to us, to a life where I finally knew what it meant to be loved.